Members of the Ontario Provincial Police are testifying today in the Emergencies Act inquiry. Both described dysfunction within the Ottawa Police Service during the so-called Freedom Convoy protest.
This was the largest unplanned deployment of OPP resources in our history.
They were asking for a lot of resources, but there was no concrete plan in terms of how those resources were going to be utilized.
The lack of communication had impacts all along.
Generally, it was a crisis in Ottawa.
The CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian has been following today's testimony, and he joins us now. A lot there. What stood out for you today, Rafi?
Well, David, I suppose we were always kind of anticipating that the OPP would come out and say that the Emergencies Act was not necessary. They kind of telegraphed that with their lawyer's presentation at the start of this thing. But today, in plain language, we heard from retired Superintendent Carson Pardee that it was not needed.
I'm not going to say that it was not useful. It certainly it provided us with some authorities relating to toll, relating to perimeters, relating to preventing people from going into the red zone, etc. But we could have done that anyway.
Some other highlights from today: former Ottawa Police Chief Peter Slowly's lawyer Tom Curry really challenging both Carty and the other OPP officer who testified, Craig Abrams, on their assertions that Slowly was too territorial, that he didn't have a proper plan and was just asking for more resources. Of course, they both pushed back on that hard, David.
All right, so it's been a rough ride for the OPS and Chief Slowly up to now. What comes next in this inquiry?
It's going to be a dramatic start and a dramatic end to next week, because on Monday we'll be hearing from outgoing Police Chief Steve Bell, who took the reins after Slowly resigned. And on Friday we'll be hearing from Slowly himself. In the meantime, we're also looking out for more reaction from Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Deputy Premier Sylvia Jones. They've both been called to testify from lawyers at the Commission. It's not clear yet whether they'll actually be doing that, David.
Okay, Rafi, thanks so much. This is CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian here in Ottawa. All right, as you've heard, multiple witnesses this week criticized the actions of Peter Slowly, the Ottawa police chief who resigned in the middle of those convoy protests. Evidence at the Emergencies Act inquiry has shown a police force in disarray. Charles Bordeleau is the former chief of the Ottawa Police, and he joins me now. So, Charles Bordeleau, not a great week of testimony for the Ottawa Police Service when they lifted the curtain on what was going on behind the scenes. I mean, it looked to the outside world things weren't going well. Were you surprised at exactly how poorly things were going?
David, I think the testimony I heard, it's the start. There's a more to hear from other individuals involved in these events, but it was revealing, it was surprising and disappointing, because the Ottawa Police Service, I know, has a lot of practice in planning major events. They've done with several demonstrations, and key is that their hallmark is their ability to work in collaboration with other partners, including the OPP, the RCMP, city government, provincial government, the federal government. That's being in the nation's capital. They've always prided themselves on their ability to work in collaboration. Okay. And the other piece is there seems to be a lack of cohesion around the plan.
Right. So I want to pick up on that because you talked about how they want to work in collaboration. But we've heard testimony that the OPP was giving them intelligence reports and bulletins, and Chief Slowly in particular was kind of just rejecting them and not paying attention to them. I mean, is it common for the OPS to ignore this sort of shared policing intelligence from a credible force like the OPP?
Absolutely not. That's why it's both surprising and disappointing. I have no idea why they were discounting the information that the OPP was giving them. Clearly, the OPP was saying this is a long-term, protracted event, and they chose to treat it as though it would be over by the weekend. That's very disappointing and surprising. And so that's why I'm looking forward to hearing more from Chief Slowly as to why they took that approach and disregarded, to that extent, the intelligence being provided by the organization, which Ottawa sits on this intelligence group. They decided to discount that information to a certain extent.
It wasn't just the intelligence, there was also sort of the rejection of the use or the minimizing of the use of the police liaison teams, which is something the OPP was critical of. I mean, I know you say you want to hear more from Chief Slowly. I mean, what would he have to say for you to understand the approach as it's been spelled out in the testimony so far as an acceptable way to respond to this thing?
I think it's important to hear from his perspective, his rationale around the decisions he's made. And, the use of the PLT, again, very surprising because Ottawa police have been leaders. And I'll go back to 2009 when we had over 30,000 Tamil demonstrators in our city where they blocked the city. There was not one arrest, no charges were laid, and everything went peacefully because we used the police liaison team. We worked in collaboration with the Canadian Association of Police to make that a best practice across Canada. So the PLT is a tremendous valuable tool to be used in any demonstration. So to see that they weren't used to the best ability and that there was conflict between what they were doing versus the operational side of the house, that doesn't make sense to me.
We've heard from the Ontario Provincial Police in their open written arguments and also in the testimony that they felt the legal mechanisms existed to deal with this protest and that they didn't need the Emergencies Act and that they eventually got to the point where they had a plan. How do you reconcile that with the total lack of action? For weeks and weeks and weeks, that it wasn't until the Emergencies Act was invoked that we actually saw demonstrable police action. I mean, if those legal powers existed, why were they not used?
I think what we're seeing is a police service that was overwhelmed, overtaxed, and had an inability to deal with the situation that they were faced with. And they knew they needed bodies, but didn't come up with a plan in order to be able to articulate to the other police services what these officers were going to do. And they were under tremendous pressure here in Ottawa to resolve this matter. So it's disappointing to see how things turned out, but you're starting to see now the friction that existed with the partners that were there to help them. And there was some distrust around their willingness to help. So that's why I think that's one of the areas I want to hear from Chief Stoley as to why, it appears to me that the message is being sent that they seem to be distrusted, that they weren't really there to help, that it was the government that was trying to interfere. That has never been my experience as a chief of police, working both with the OPP, other municipal police services, and the RCMP. Always a willingness to work together towards the common goal of keeping our communities safe. So I think that's an area that needs to be explored, and we need to hear from Chief Stoley as to what does he have to say around all those comments that are being made right now.
Look, I know we're only a week and a bit into this and we still need to hear from some key people, but when you look at this breakdown in trust and the inability to mobilize police force to take action, does that in any way justify the use of the Emergencies Act in your view? If all the lower orders just couldn't get it together well enough to do something, did it take the federal government to unclog this pipe?
Well, I think it's clear that there were some tools that were provided under the Emergencies Act that were very useful to the police service. Well, whether they could have done those actions without the Emergencies Act, I think that is still being debated. But clearly, access to tow trucks, preventing people from coming to the red zone, being able to mobilize other resources, those are key pieces of tools that were useful. And also, in the financial piece is to close off the tap that was funding this. There are mechanisms in place to do that, but those take a long time. So the immediacy needed. To me, they needed those tools. Now, whether those tools were justified, I think once we connect all the dots, hear the full story, I'm hoping the commission will be able to make that determination.
Okay, one last quick topic to touch on before we let you go. Today, Ottawa appointed a new chief of police to replace Chief Stoley on a permanent basis. I don't want to speak to the merits of the individual candidate. It's more the timing. There's a municipal election coming on Monday. We don't have the results of this inquiry. We still need to hear the full story of what happened inside the OPS. Was it right for the Police Services Board here in Ottawa to move ahead with picking a new chief with all of these questions and processes still unanswered?
I've always supported the board's decision back in July to start that process because the police service would have been without a confirmed chief of police for more than a year and a half if they waited for the election or a new board. So I'm pleased that they were able to make that rigorous selection process. And I want to congratulate Chief Stubbs on his selection. And I think it's important to acknowledge the great work that Steve Bell did as the interim chief in a very difficult time for the police service.
Okay, Charles Bordeleau, thank you so much for joining us. That's former Ottawa Chief of Police Charles Bordeleau.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.